A Kansas tornado's black funnel roared across the prairie, its deafening wail shredding barns, uprooting ancient oaks, and hurling a camper van into a muddy ditch, where a mother, her 2 children, and their elderly neighbor lay trapped, their desperate cries drowned by the storm's relentless fury. On a rain-soaked highway, Joseph Redhawk, a solitary Native American trucker whose heart carried the scars of a past he could never outrun. His sharp ears catching a faint plea on the wind, the sky churned green and black, as if the heavens themselves were collapsing. Yet Joseph moved with quiet resolve, his calloused hands steady against the chaos. He plunged into the wreckage, defying the storm's wrath to pull each soul to safety, unaware that a hidden trail camera was capturing his courage. As sirens pierced the fading rain, he slipped away, a shadow in the mist, not knowing the woman he'd saved was a county commissioner, whose gratitude would ignite a statewide search for the hero no one knew. His only thought was the echo of his grandmother's words, "Run toward the need." Joseph always. That night, the plains whispered his name, though he was already gone, chasing the horizon. The afternoon sky over Russell County had been oppressive, a heavy shroud of slate-gray clouds blotting out the sun. The endless expanse of wheat fields, usually golden and vibrant, lay muted under a pall of eerie stillness. The horizon, a boundless sweep of prairie, seemed to shrink as the storm gathered strength, its presence palpable in the charged air. No crickets chirped, no hawks circled. The world held its breath as if sensing the violence to come. On a narrow ribbon of asphalt cutting through the heart of the plains, a single truck rolled steadily onward, its headlights piercing the gathering dusk. The truck, a weathered Freightliner Cascadia, growled softly, its engine a steady rumble beneath, the faint strains of a Lakota flute melody drifting from the dashboard radio. Behind the wheel sat Joseph Redhawk, 42, his calloused hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, his dark eyes fixed on the road ahead, his face, etched with the lines of a life spent under open skies, carried a quiet strength, his long black hair tied back in a loose braid. A thermos of sage tea sat in the cup holder, its steam long faded, next to a small beaded keychain, a gift from his late grandmother, the only family he'd ever truly known. Joseph was a man of few words, his voice low and measured, resonating with the cadence of someone who spoke only when the moment demanded it. For nearly 2 decades, he'd crisscrossed the Midwest, hauling grain, machinery, and lumber from Nebraska to Oklahoma. He had no partner, no children, just the road, the sky, and a collection of memories he carried like stones in his pocket. Born on the Pine Ridge Reservation, he'd lost his parents young to illness and accident, raised instead by his grandmother, who taught him the old stories and the value of standing firm in a world that often tried to break you. At 19, Joseph had left the reservation, chasing stability in a world that offered little. He'd spent 3 years as a volunteer firefighter in Wichita, learning to navigate the chaos of emergencies with a cool head. But a tragic fire, where red tape delayed aid and cost lives, left him disillusioned. He turned to trucking, finding solace in the rhythm of long hauls and the solitude of his cab. The Freightliner was his sanctuary, its interior sparse but meaningful. A small dreamcatcher hung from the rearview mirror, swaying gently, and a faded photo of his grandmother, smiling in a shawl, was taped to the dashboard. His life was guided by a simple code, passed down from her: honor your word, do the work, and never turn away from someone in need. Joseph's life hadn't always been solitary. There was a time in his late 20s when he'd come close to settling down. A woman named Clara, a schoolteacher in Topeka, had filled his days with laughter and dreams of a small house with a garden. But a late-night call from a friend in trouble pulled him back to the reservation. And by the time he returned, Clara had moved on, unwilling to wait for a man tethered to the road. The loss stung, but Joseph buried it deep, letting the miles and the hum of the engine dull the ache. Now, as he guided the Freightliner through the gentle curves of the Kansas countryside, he felt the weight of those years. The cab was his home, its dashboard a shrine to what mattered, the dream catcher A reminder to hold fast to hope. The photo, a tether to his roots, and a small hand-carved hawk figurine, a gift from a fellow trucker who'd called him Redhawk for his sharp instincts. On quiet nights, Joseph would trace the figurine's lines with his thumb, thinking of the boy he'd been, dreaming of soaring free. The wind began to change, no longer a steady breeze, but a restless, jagged force. Pushing against the truck in sharp bursts, the radio crackled. The flute music cutting out as an automated voice broke through. Severe weather alert. Tornado warning issued for Russell, Ellis, and Lincoln counties. Seek immediate shelter. This is a life-threatening EF4 storm moving southeast at 55 maybe. Repeat. Seek shelter now. Joseph's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he studied the horizon. The clouds were alive, twisting into sinister shapes, their edges glowing with a sickly green hue. He'd grown up with tornadoes, had seen their power firsthand as a child. When a twister leveled half his uncle's farm, his grandmother had called them the Earth's anger, a force that demanded respect. Now his instincts, sharpened by years on the plains, told him this was no ordinary storm. A mile ahead, he spotted a crumbling grain elevator, its silo rusted, but its concrete base sturdy enough to offer shelter. He eased the truck onto the shoulder, tires crunching over gravel and tumbleweeds, and parked beneath the elevator's overhang. He killed the engine but left the keys in, a habit born of caution. Stepping out, he felt the first heavy drops of rain, cold and deliberate, as if the sky were measuring its strength. The wind tugged at his denim jacket, and he tilted his head, listening. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. The land speaks if you know how to hear it. And the land was screaming now. As Joseph scanned the horizon, a faint sound cut through the rising howl of the wind. A human voice, raw and urgent, calling from the field across the road. It was barely audible, muffled by the storm's growing roar, but unmistakable. Help! Please, we're trapped! His heart quickened, not with fear but with purpose. He crossed the road, his boots sinking into the muddy earth, and followed the sound, his eyes sweeping the landscape. There, in a shallow ditch, lay a camper van, its frame crumpled like a discarded can. Its roof was caved in, windows shattered, and one side was half buried in the mud. A faint wisp of smoke curled from its undercarriage, mingling with the scent of wet earth and gasoline. The cry came again, weaker now, a child's voice. "Mom, wake up! Someone, please!" Joseph didn't pause to think. He climbed down into the ditch, rain stinging his face, and reached the camper's mangled door. The metal was warped, its hinges groaning as he pried it open with a piece of rebar he found nearby. The storm was closing in, the sky now a churning mass of black and green, the air thick with the weight of imminent destruction. But the voices, faint but alive, drove him forward. Inside, the camper was a labyrinth of destruction. Broken furniture, scattered clothes, and a child's backpack lay strewn across the tilted floor. A flickering lantern cast eerie shadows, its light barely piercing the gloom. Joseph crouched, his eyes adjusting as he called out, "I'm here. Where are you?" A girl's voice answered, trembling but clear. "Back here. My mom's hurt and my brother." "He's not moving!" Joseph navigated the wreckage, glass crunching under his boots, and found them near the rear. A girl, about 12, knelt beside a woman in her 30s, whose face was pale, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Nearby, a boy, maybe 10, lay slumped against a shattered cabinet, his breathing shallow. An elderly woman, her silver hair matted with dirt, was pinned under a collapsed table, her eyes closed but her chest rising faintly. "What's your name?" Joseph asked the girl, his voice steady as he checked the woman's pulse. "Sophie," she whispered, her hands clutching her mother's sleeve. "That's my mom, Rachel, my brother, Ethan, and our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan." "All right, Sophie. You're doing great. We're getting out of here." Joseph's firefighter training took over. Rachel's pulse was weak but steady. Ethan's was fainter, his face ashen. Mrs. Callahan's breathing was erratic, her skin clammy. The storm's roar grew louder, a deafening rumble like 1,000 trains converging. Time was slipping away. Joseph worked quickly, lifting Rachel first, supporting her weight as he maneuvered through the wreckage. Sophie followed, clutching Ethan's hand, though he remained unresponsive. Rain poured through the camper's broken roof, soaking them as Joseph navigated the slanted floor. He reached the door and eased Rachel into the mud outside, propping her against a nearby fence post. Back inside, he knelt beside Ethan. The boy's pulse was faint, his skin cold. Joseph wrapped him in a torn sleeping bag and carried him gently, his small frame light but heavy with the weight of responsibility. Sophie stumbled behind, tears streaming down her face. Joseph laid Ethan beside Rachel, then returned for Mrs. Callahan. The table pinning her was heavy, its metal frame bent. Using the rebar, he pried it free, grimacing as he felt the strain in his shoulders. He lifted her carefully, her frail body trembling, and carried her to the others. Joseph sprinted to his truck. Grabbing a tarp, a first aid kit, and a flashlight, he covered the family against the pelting rain, his hands moving with practiced precision as he bandaged Rachel's forehead and checked Ethan's vitals. Sophie clung to his side, her small hand gripping his jacket. The air grew heavier, the pressure dropping like a curtain falling. Joseph glanced up. A massive funnel cloud loomed, black and merciless, shredding trees and hurling debris across the plains. They had seconds. "Sophie, stay close," Joseph shouted, scooping her into the truck's cab. He dragged Rachel, Ethan, and Mrs. Callahan to the sheltered side of the freightliner, wedging them against the concrete edge of the ditch. Using his body as a shield, he covered Sophie, his arms locked around her trembling frame. The tornado struck, a deafening roar that drowned out thought. The truck shuddered as debris battered its frame, a barn door, a tractor tire, a child's tricycle, all airborne in the storm's wrath. Joseph held fast, whispering to Sophie, "We're okay. I've got you." The dream catcher swayed wildly in the cab, its feathers tangled. The storm raged, an unholy scream that tore at the earth, ripping a silo from its foundation and scattering its steel like confetti. Joseph's muscles burned, his heart pounding not from fear, but from the weight of lives depending on him. He thought of his grandmother, her voice steady in his memory. "You are stronger than the storm, Joseph, always." The tornado passed, its howl fading into a distant moan. The rain softened, and the world fell silent, save for Sophie's quiet sobs and Rachel's labored breathing. Joseph lifted his head, scanning the devastation. The camper was gone, flattened into a pile of twisted metal. The field was a graveyard of splintered wood, uprooted crops, and a single, unbroken rocking chair, inexplicably upright in the chaos. "You all right, Sophie?" Joseph asked, brushing mud from her face. She nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. "You stayed," she whispered. "Always will," Joseph replied, offering a faint smile. He checked on Rachel, now stirring, and Ethan, whose breathing was steadier. Mrs. Callahan's pulse was weak but present. With the first aid kit, he cleaned their wounds, using his own belt to secure a makeshift splint on Rachel's arm. His hands moved with the precision of someone who'd patched up countless injuries, each movement a quiet defiance of the chaos around them. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Joseph stood, his clothes soaked, his hands stained with blood and dirt. He surveyed the wreckage, his gaze lingering on a child's drawing. Half buried in the mud, he picked it up, wiping the rain from its surface. It showed a family of 4, smiling under a bright sun. Sophie's work, he guessed. He tucked it into his jacket, a small act of preservation in a world turned upside down. As paramedics swarmed the scene, Joseph stepped back. Rachel, now conscious, grabbed his hand. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Joseph Redhawk, just a driver passing through." "You saved us," she said, tears welling. "I'm a county commissioner. I can help you, anything you need." Joseph shook his head. "Just make sure your kids and your neighbor are okay." He returned to his truck, started the engine and drove off, his taillights fading into the mist. The paramedics, busy with the injured, didn't notice him leave. Sophie watched his truck disappear, clutching the tarp he'd left behind, her heart heavy with gratitude she couldn't yet name. The storm left Russell County scarred but resilient. Mid stories of loss, one tale began to spread. A trail camera video showing a truck driver rescuing a family from a wrecked camper. Shared on local forums, it gained traction, dubbed the Prairie Savior by those who watched in awe. Truckers swapped stories at diners, and farmers scanned highways for a freightliner with a scratched fender and a dream catcher in the window. Rachel, recovering in a Salina hospital with Sophie, Ethan and Mrs. Callahan, watched the video with her family. She recognized Joseph's face, his steady presence etched in her memory. A county commissioner with 15 years of service, she'd faced countless crises, but none like this. Determined to honor the man who'd saved them, she tasked her staff with tracking his truck's plates, a task complicated by Joseph's nomadic life. The video went viral, shared across Kansas and beyond. News outlets ran segments calling him the man who defied the storm. Social media buzzed with hashtags. Joseph Prairie Savior, Shisha Kansas Hero. Strangers left notes at truck stops hoping to reach him. A mural appeared on a barn in Russell, depicting a freightliner shielding a family from a twister. Yet Joseph remained elusive, hauling hay near Dodge City, unaware his name was becoming a beacon of hope. Sophie, now back at school, drew tirelessly sketches of Joseph, his truck, the storm. Her teachers encouraged her, sensing art was her way of processing the trauma. Ethan, quieter since the ordeal, wore a hawk-shaped pendant, a gift from a nurse who'd heard the story. Mrs. Callahan, frail but recovering, told anyone who'd listen about the man who'd carried her to safety. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at a truck stop in Hayes, where Joseph forwarded his mail through a friend. It bore the county seal and a handwritten note. "Please come to Salina. We owe you our lives." Joseph stared at it, his hands still greasy from a morning repair. Ceremonies weren't his world. He owned no suit, preferred the road's anonymity. But Sophie's voice, small and trusting, lingered in his mind. "You stayed." He thought of his grandmother, who'd always said, "Sometimes you let the world see you, Joseph, so they know what's possible." The letter felt like her voice, pulling him back. He packed his cleanest flannel, a navy shirt embroidered with his tribe's emblem, and set out for Salina, the dream catcher swaying as he drove. The Salina Civic Center was packed, its stage adorned with banners of recovery and resilience. Rachel, fully recovered, stood at the podium, her children and Mrs. Callahan in the front row. "I've served this county for years," she began, "but I've never been saved, not until a stranger risked everything for us." She played the video, the crowd silent as Joseph's actions unfolded, pulling Sophie from the wreck, carrying Ethan, shielding them all. "That man is Joseph Redhawk," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "A truck driver who showed us what courage means. He didn't wait for thanks, but today Kansas says his name." She announced the Kansas Star of Valor, the state's highest civilian honor for Joseph's bravery. The crowd rose, tears streaming, as the video froze on Joseph protecting Sophie. Joseph arrived quietly, slipping through a side door. He wore his embroidered flannel, his braid neat, the hawk figurine in his pocket. The crowd stood as he took the stage, their silence a tribute louder than applause. Rachel pinned the medal to his chest, whispering, "You gave me my family back." At the podium, Joseph hesitated, then spoke. "I'm not one for speeches. I drive a truck, haul loads, keep moving. That's my life. But that day I heard a girl crying for help. I thought of my grandmother, how she'd want me to run toward that sound. So I did. We're all we've got out here. Look out for each other, especially when no one's watching." Sophie approached, holding a framed drawing, a freightliner, shielding 4 figures from a storm, titled "My Hero Drives a Truck." Joseph's throat tightened. "Keep drawing, Sophie," he said, his voice thick. "You're going to tell big stories." She hugged him, and Ethan handed him a small hawk pendant, a twin to his own. Mrs. Callahan, leaning on a cane, pressed his hand, her eyes shining. That night, Joseph drove north under a sky ablaze with stars, the medal in his glove box beside his grandmother's photo. The radio buzzed with his story, but he turned it down, smiling faintly. He didn't need the world's praise. Knowing Sophie, Ethan, Rachel, and Mrs. Callahan were safe, that was enough. Months later, Joseph's story lived on. Schools taught it in civics classes. Churches mentioned it in sermons. Sophie's drawings were displayed in a local gallery, raising funds for storm victims. Ethan joined a youth firefighting program, inspired by Joseph's calm under pressure. Rachel spearheaded a county initiative to equip rural areas with storm shelters, naming it the Redhawk Project. Joseph, back on the road, kept driving, his freightliner a familiar sight on the plains. Occasionally, a trucker would honk in salute, or a child would wave, recognizing the dream catcher in his window. He'd nod, his heart warmed, but his eyes stayed on the horizon, where the next mile and the next story awaited. Joseph Redhawk's story reminds us that in our darkest moments, a single act of courage can light the way. Have you ever faced a crisis, a storm, a disaster, or an unexpected challenge, where someone's kindness or bravery changed everything? Or perhaps you were the one who stepped up, helping a stranger when no one else could? We're inspired by your stories, so please share in the comments. What happened? How did you or others react? And where are you watching from? Your experiences weave the tapestry of humanity that keeps us connected. If this tale of a trucker's selfless heroism moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power of compassion. And ring the notification bell to join our growing community. Let's honor heroes like Joseph by sharing and uplifting one another. Together, we can make every mile a story worth telling.